discuss the situation in Myanmar a little further, I'm joined by Dr John Blaxland from the Strategic and Defence Studies Centre at the Australian National University. Dr Blaxland, this fighting has now broken out in about 4 different states, hundreds of kilometres apart. Why do you think the unrest is flaring and indeed spreading?
Well, I think it's interesting to reflect on the challenge of a liberalising state. If we compare the situation in Indonesia, when liberalisation or democratisation was taking place there, we saw a similar spike in violence. And there is something about turbulence, about being unsettled, about vested interests being challenged, about people seeking to find somebody to blame for the changed circumstances. And if we look at the specifics in Myanmar itself at the moment, it's actually hard to figure out exactly who's behind it. And one of the reasons why it's difficult is because there's a clear incentive for the military to want the process of democratisation, as we've seen it, a partial democratisation, to succeed. Why do they want it to succeed? Well, I think they want it to succeed because there's clear investment opportunities and benefits to accrue for them and for the country with openness. And we've seen that already, significant opening up happening. But there is a dark side. There is a bunch of cronies who are being deliberately and explicitly excluded from deals, and President Obama made this point to Thein Sein when he visited Washington recently. There are people who are still on the blacklist, and these are the old cronies, the business cronies of the old regime, who appear to have a vested interest in unsettling things.
So you think
it's not clear.
They might be helping to organise or fund or fuel in some way some of this unrest?
Look, I don't have concrete evidence of that, but in just understanding the dynamics inside the country, it's a plausible explanation. And one of the things is that people would automatically, you think to blame the military or the police. There may well be an element of that, but my sense is that that's not necessarily the explanation here, because, as I say, there are imperatives for them to encourage order and peace to reign. Because they've got a vested interest in the outcome of this whole this reform that's been taking place in the last couple of years inside the country.
And yet, as our correspondent Zoe Daniel has been reporting, you know, there is some irony here. Here is Myanmar trying to transform itself from a repressive state, and yet residents are asking for martial rule to be imposed in order to try to quell some of this violence.
Which is exactly the point that some of the cronies or whoever is funding and backing this shadowy group that's operating are probably thinking. Now, this group, it looks like it may well be associated with a fairly fringe right-wing group known as 969. That's what a lot of the conjecture is putting out there. This is a group of people who are espousing so-called Buddhist views, but really it's very harsh interpretation of things that springs from a fairly deep-seated xenophobia. And a country like Myanmar is a very challenged one because of the ethnic diversity of the place.
So I was going to ask you, because, you know, as the West starts to look at increasing investment and ties with Myanmar, how do countries like Australia and the United States, for example, balance the commercial potentials with human rights? How do we make a judgment on whether or not the government is indeed doing enough to try to quell the violence?
Yes, well, that's a very good question. It's a really tricky one, but it's not only commercial concerns, there are geostrategic concerns. So there's a three-way play here, if you like, in terms of humanitarian priorities, and the Australian government is quite active in that, and we've got a substantial boost to the aid program that Prime Minister Gillard announced a little while ago when President Thein Sein visited Canberra. So that's the humanitarian aspect. Then there's the economic aspect, and there's the economic forum opening up soon, and there's major investment programs under consideration. It's actually very hard to get a hotel at a reasonable rate in Rangoon at the moment, or Yangon, simply because so many people are looking at options and considering how to invest and engage in the country economically. But then there's the geostrategic dimension, and that's the whole question about the rise of China, the rebalance or the pivot of the United States back to Asia, and where Myanmar fits into that equation. And Myanmar has been the unwanted child, if you like, of ASEAN, and it's now coming very much back into the fold. And it seems to be that in terms of the interests of ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and of the great powers, that Myanmar play a role, a constructive role in that forum.
All right. Well, it's certainly very interesting. Dr. John Blaxland, thank you very much for joining us from Canberra this afternoon.
My pleasure.